What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Christians of all ages? Welcome to the Complete Sinner's Guide. I am your host, Tyler Fowler, and with me is a plethora of awesome people. Josh Wood, my co-host David Russell, and our special guest, Reformed pastor and author of the Dorean Principle, Mr. Conley Owens. Guys, how's it going tonight?
Going pretty good, bud.
It's good, bud.
So we always start the show with how's your week kind of been? We're doing YouTube and Facebook Live tonight instead of our regular radio show. Noah's out of town, and it just seems like whenever Noah's out of town, everything goes wrong at the radio station. And so we decided to come on YouTube tonight and do this YouTube Live. So Josh, what is going on, brother? How has your week been? And is there anything new going on in your life?
Oh, my week's been good. Just got a good deal accomplished at the women and children's shelter at the rescue mission, and finishing a remodel on the first floor of one of the back wings that's going to be used for overnight shelter for the ladies in the community, and that's exciting. And as far as like personal life goes, kind of had like a low day a couple days ago, but boy, did God bless me with a loving wife. So I've had a good week, man.
Amen. David, how's your week been, brother?
It's good, man. This week has been a little bit of a low-key week. I finished out the semester, finished all my assignments, got that done. I'm in seminary, so it's, gotta do the work, but it's done, and I'm excited. God always has me studying something new every day, which is exciting. One of the things that is wild when you're writing for school is when you're writing papers, there's always a limit, word limit, right? And that kind of like hinders what you really want to say. So you have to figure out, which is good. I guess, it helps you become a more proficient writer.
Right.
But, yeah, man. So God has me studying stuff even outside of school every day as well. So I'm grateful for that. And yeah, man, it's just been one of those weeks where it's kind of been laid back, but I'm still busy. I work all the time, but with his grace and his love, it's just, it's a constant reminder every day of it's motivation, and it's, this is why we do it and stuff like that. So that's what it's, that's just kind of like how I think, so, yeah, that's been one of those kind of weeks where, you kind of reflect and you work,
Right on, man. Right on. So you attend Trinity, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. I thought so. So
Braxton,
you gotta love Trinity. So shout out to Braxton Hunter, and Jonathan Pritchett. But yeah, so you ended the semester recently. You're going to go back on the 7th of April. Is that?
Yeah, I'm actually doing 3 classes, which is, a pretty big workload as far as writing goes, for Trinity, but yeah, it's going to be a lot more work, especially when I have new projects going on and other things that are going to take my attention away as far as family. I got 4 kids and a wife, and we're looking for a new pup, and a new cat, because we just lost 2 within the last month, which is really hard, especially with the youngness of one, and then another one that we expected to live at least 4 more years. So, it was real sad. It's still somber in the house, but everybody's starting to get back to normal.
I'm glad, man. I'm glad. I know you were pretty down, in the dumps. We were talking last week about that, and I'm glad everything's coming back, around full circle.
Yeah,
everything's going good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's going as good. We're bouncing back. Let's just put it that way. But I don't want to take any more of your time, man. You got to introduce this new guest, man.
Absolutely. And without further ado, Mr. Conley Owens. So you, sir, you're Reformed Baptist pastor. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And you're from Silicon Valley. And introduce, if you would, since it's the first time on CSG, introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of background about you. What is the book, The Dorean Principle, and how was your week, brother?
Sure. Yeah, my week's all right. Been a busy week. A lot of stuff is going on at our church. It's we're kind of a season of revitalization. Man, a lot of interesting stuff going on. Someone visiting from Texas to see if they want to come out here to join the work that's happened at the church. So, yeah, a lot of good times. Yeah, my name's Conley Owens. I live here in Sunnyvale with my wife and 7 kids, soon to be 8 later this month.
Congrats. That's
Thanks.
awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I am currently bivocational pastor. A lot of people look at this book and they think I'm bivocational by conviction or something. That's not the case. I'd love to be in full-time ministry. That's just not in God's providence at the moment. So I'm a software engineer by day and a pastor by night. Whenever the bat signal goes, I suppose.
Right on, man. You throw on your cape and you get to it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I got it. So what's the name of your church?
Silicon Valley Reformed Baptist Church.
Silicon Valley Reformed Baptist Church. And how long have you been a pastor?
I've been a pastor for 2.5 years, but I've been involved in leadership and preaching there for a number of years prior to that too.
Right on, man. All right, let's jump into it. The Dorean Principle. So I have not listened to the entire book yet. It's been super hectic week for me as well. And I have begun listening to it, and I think I get the concept of it. But you wrote it, brother. I'm just going to go ahead and let you explain, kind of give us a brief background of the Dorean Principle. What is the Dorean Principle, and what was it that got you convicted to actually write this book?
Sure. So, yeah, the word Dorean is the Greek adverb that means freely. Jesus said, Matthew 10:8, freely you receive, freely give. So it's really about a book exploring the scope and limitations of that statement, as well as all the implications. Because right after that, Jesus says, the worker's worthy of his food, and a lot of people know. In Luke, it says the worker's worthy of his wages. So how do you hold those two together? On one hand, Jesus is saying minister shouldn't get paid. On the other hand, it's saying you should get paid. So which one is it, right? And as you hold them together and you try to understand the harmony that's there, Jesus isn't contradicting himself. I believe the right way to think about this is between the difference between reciprocity, where the gospel is being exchanged for money, and co-labor, where the ones who are giving are not giving in exchange for the gospel, but rather out of support of the ministry. So it really all comes down to that distinction. And then looking at the consistency in Paul's ministry, because there's a lot of time when he accepts money, a lot of times when he doesn't accept money, and then seeing it elsewhere in Scripture also. So that's really the beginning of it. And why did I feel the need to write about this? I've as a software engineer, I have a lot of thoughts on licensing. In fact, that's kind of what I've focused on for a long time is in software, is just the issue of licensing and open source software, if people know what that is. And so that's led me to be dissatisfied with a lot of the way the church thinks about licensing, because a lot of times, full copyright is asserted in order to secure revenue streams, and always felt like this is very inefficient. Even commercial software entities who are going for profit have understood that this isn't always the efficient way of doing things. So it always felt like something was off there, and I didn't think I had any reason to bind someone's conscience about it. But as I began seeing more and more, and the Scripture says a lot about money and ministry, and there really is something here to say about the way the church is treating ministry commercially. That's why I felt the need to write about, because I didn't see anybody else had really. I mean, people have written on this topic, but not at the same, not trying to hold everything together. Usually just focusing on one thing or another.
Right. It does seem, the further kind of we go down the road in church history, and especially in America, there is some of this commercialization of Christianity, like we were talking about. And on one hand, David and I were kind of talking about this off of air, and on one hand, I understand exactly where you're coming from, but on the other hand, it seems to me it's almost like we need to, or not we need to, but it's almost like we're not assuming, but needing to know the person's heart before. So for example, what I'm trying to get at is, say we're doing the podcast, right? We have this YouTube channel, and someone wants to donate because they like the content. Would it be sinful for me to receive that money off the top? Is it, or is it that black and white, really?
So there is one of the criticisms I've gotten for the book is, is this a very subjective ethic where me taking money is right or wrong based on someone else's heart, something I can't fully know. I don't think that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the words and gestures of ministry, just like with all communication, it has to be attended with due diligence to make sure that we are communicating the right message, that we are not the source of the gospel, but rather just deliverers of it. And God is the source of gospel. All obligation is due directly to him, and only indirectly because of him to any minister that you would support. So yeah, it's about due diligence in your communication with these things.
Sure. Josh, David, you guys got anything that you would
I was
like
going to say, first off, it's nice to meet you, bro. And I'm a fellow Californian, so honestly, if I ever get a chance, I might come swing through your county, take a small road trip down
Sounds
there,
good.
and check out your church. That'd be cool.
Are any road trips small in California?
It's a huge
no,
state.
usually if it's a small road trip, we just call it a commute. That's what we call it here. Anything less than like 2 hours is usually considered a commute rather than a road trip. And I know there are states where like you could drive 2 hours in any direction and get in a whole nother state. In California, that's not how it works. You'll drive 3.5 hours just to get to Nevada, and that's the closest as far as where I'm at. But Silicon Valley is actually not that far. I'm in the East Bay, so
okay, nice.
Yeah, it would definitely not be that far for a travel just to check it out. I go to a church in Concord, but
Okay,
if I ever get the opportunity, I would love to come down and meet you in person and like hang, hey,
Sounds
get you
great.
a cup of coffee or something. That'd be cool. But as far as your content, I haven't actually gone through any of the book, but I've listened to a couple interviews that you've done already.
Sure.
It seems like this has been something that is the book recently released. Is that why most of the interviews are only a couple months old?
Right. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it was back in October.
Okay. And so from what I've gathered, just listening to the interviews and the questions that seem to be kind of generically repeated through the interviews is, well, what do you mean? And,
Right.
where in scripture, point us to the,
Right.
I'm kind of curious as to, because I think I understand the idea. What you're doing is ultimately trying to make a line that we shouldn't blur anymore, that doesn't allow for the Osteens and the Copelands and the TD Jakes and these guys that obviously have made an exuberant amount of money by using their ministry as a product rather than strictly as a ministry. And I agree to that. I definitely agree that there are some serious abuses, and even further back in church history, it seems like it kind of manifests itself in many different ways. Even the way that the Reformation kind of was speaking out against things like, dropping money in the money box to help out your dead neighbors and things like that. It's just there's a lot of things that the church has been kind of funny about finances. But finance is such an important thing. Like even marriages fail over finance. And so seeing things kind of relationally, I was going to ask, is there something about the way that you see this principle working in that separates the person from the ministry, to where the person who wants to give can give toward the ministry without giving toward the person? Am I following?
No, I'm not totally sure I understand what's being said.
Okay. So if let's say, because I do a homeless outreach ministry on the weekends sometimes with my wife. And I've had people who want to support what I'm doing because they hear about it. They're like, "Oh, I'd like to help out." I'm like, "I need more hands." They're like, "Well, I don't have time. Can I just give you some money to go buy more stuff?"
Yeah.
I make a firm separation between me and the ministry, so much so that there's like a separate bank account and things like that. I don't have a license or like a nonprofit organization registry or anything like that, but I'm very convicted about keeping all of that separate from myself. And if somebody wants to give, they're not giving to me, they're going to give to the ministry. Is that along the same lines as what you're describing? Because again, forgive me, I haven't read the book,
Sure.
so I'm kind of going off of what I've heard so far in the interview.
Yeah. I don't. That certainly sounds like a healthy practice to make sure there's no corruption, skimming off the top or anything. But right. I imagine back in Paul's day, they didn't always have such clear divisions in bank accounts and things, that they were always able to do that. So right. I wouldn't draw too hard of a line on what's expected of people, given that I wouldn't be able to hold the apostles to the same standards. But yeah, that does sound healthy for today's context. Right. But it's not necessarily what I'm addressing.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're really hitting the accountability aspect. of it is what I'm sensing. There's not like it's not an extreme. There is some freedom here. And you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I've noticed these problems too. I think we all have. I mean, you see Kenneth Copeland flying on a jet, private jet, and to me, that's like, okay, well, if you can buy a private jet, you can be feeding the widows and the orphans that are in your area, and sacrifice yourself and deal with the demons that you say that you're flying next to. You're not that important, dude. Come on. You're supposed to be a suffering servant as well. I mean, that's who you want to emulate. You want to wash those people's feet that you think have the demons, because they're real hurting people, and it just, to me, as as somebody that does invest and doesn't get paid, and you're bivocational, so you understand too. To me, I see where you're coming from, and it is a huge problem with today. I mean, we live off of fiat money. It's not as easy as it was back then, or it is easier in a way because you can just print money. It's fiat. It's just paper. At least back in the day, you had to have some sort of metal.
Yeah.
You had to be backed by metal.
Yeah, I can't print money, but maybe you
Yeah.
can. I can't.
I can't, but you know what? It's easier for those that are part of that secular worldly system and can feed us that, and even draw us further away from that accountability and stuff like that. So what I've heard so far, I agree with everything.
So yeah, if we can take some of those examples, but given Copeland and Osteen and Jakes and etc. So part of what I'm doing is saying, okay, like we all know that's wrong, right? We all get the heebie-jeebies about that. But what is it about that that's wrong? Like what is the essence of it, and are we violating any of that? So there's several things that people point to. Like one, it's the false teaching that tends to it. Yeah, but let's say that we're teaching true stuff. There'd still be a problem there, right? If they had the same financial model. So it's not the false teaching specifically, even though that's certainly part of the problem.
Right.
Is it the quantity? Well, certainly there's something wrong with the quantity, but even but you have much smaller fries who are engaged in the exact same kind of corruption, So it's not just, once you hit $2 million, like that's the marker, and now you're going about this wrongly.
Right.
And maybe you can say it's the heart, but the Bible says a lot about from out of the heart the mouth speaks. So there has to be some kind of practice that we're looking for. And what I believe it comes down to when you look at these different passages is reciprocity, right? Because how do these people make their money? Sure, there's a lot of stirring up people to give that probably shouldn't be stirred up to give. So there's no way around. Well, let me just put it this way, that that's okay in the right context. Obviously, people should be giving. The Bible talks a lot about that. But what is often happening is this reciprocity, where if you buy my book, then you'll get this this wonderful product, this ministry. Or if you pay me, I will pray for you. If you pay me, this thing will happen for you. And so this very quid pro quo kind of exchange of ministry for money. And so that's what I'm getting at. Now, if that's the essence of what's wrong from a biblical perspective, and now you look at the true church, that's trying to do things right, are they? And the answer is very frequently not. Very frequently there is a lot of reciprocity going on within the true church too. People I respect and consider highly.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like I pulled this book off of my my top shelf up here. So I got Louis Sperry Chafer's Systematic Theology, and so Conley, I'm sure that there would be a lot that you agreed, with out of this book, as I do, right? And so what you're saying is that it's almost like a bartering system, right? Louis Sperry Chafer says, I'm going to write everything in here that I got from the Bible, right? That I think what the Bible teaches, and I'm going to sell it to you. In exchange, I'm going to give you what I think is true for your money. That's what you're talking about. It doesn't matter if it's Joel Osteen teaching the prosperity gospel or Louis Sperry Chafer teaching Reformed systematic theology. What the whole of it all is that this reciprocity, this I give you this in exchange for finances, correct?
Right. Yeah, and you look at Second Corinthians where Paul's upset at the super apostles for charging money while he's preaching freely, and people look at that and they say, "What's wrong?" And they're like, "Oh, well, it's actually okay for Paul to charge. He just doesn't do it to distinguish himself from the super apostles." It's like, what is he choosing that arbitrarily? Like he wears a red hat because they wear blue hats, or what is wrong with what they're doing? And people say, "Oh, it's because they've got the false teaching," but that's not why would he pick on their practices if it's the false teaching that's the problem? It says in 2 Corinthians 2:17, "For we are not like so many peddlers of God's word, but as men of sincerity in the sight of God we speak in Christ." So we're not to be peddlers of God's word. There's not supposed to be this commercial transaction that happens. Now, certainly there should be many people supporting the ministry, and Paul calls for the Corinthians to support him multiple times throughout that letter. But he says he'll never take their money in exchange for the gospel in 2 Corinthians 11.
Right. You had mentioned on your interview with AD that there were healthy ways for the church to support ministries and without being like reciprocity. You talked about co-laboring. Right. Can you go into what it is? What do you mean by co-laboring, and what are some healthy ways that the church can finance ministries?
Sure. So I'll give two answers to that. The first one is, like, very simply, co-laboring is what you would imagine. We're working together. I'm not paying you back for something. You might be helping me with something, and in the same context, I'm giving you money, just like you do with your pastor. He's preaching to you, you're giving him money. But what's going on in that situation is the whole church is laboring together to make sure the gospel is proclaimed in that area. It's not this transaction. It's I give to these missionaries so that the gospel will go forward, so that the work of God will be done. It's not because of this thing that I got and I give back as though this person is the one that I'm obligated to. And so that leads to the kind of the second answer to this. If you want a more technical answer, the issue is, where is the direct obligation, right? Who am I directly obligated to? Now, when I engage in reciprocity, when I give someone, a direct payment, that's saying I am directly obligated to this person as though they are the source of the gospel. However, if I say I am obligated to God, and God would have me then offer to others who are his servants, that's where it is. And so a very good analogy to this, and Paul makes a lot of analogies in 1 Corinthians 9 that all have the same shape, but the best of his analogies, because it's the most direct of his analogies, is to the priesthood, right? He says that the Israelites gave money to the priests, and this is a good thing. But if you think about what's going on there, those people who would read 1 Corinthians 9 and come away from that with the idea that, people owe ministers directly, and it's right for ministers to charge for ministry. That's not what was happening with the Levites. The Levites weren't charging for ministry. The Israelites were giving to them the tithes, the sacrifices, and the offerings, but they weren't giving directly to them. That would be idolatry, right? To make a sacrifice directly to the Levites. The right thing to do is to make these things to God. That's where the direct obligation is, and then only indirectly, as they receive from the Lord these things.
Right. So there is a lot of heart there. There's a lot of what is your motive for giving? Is it, do you think you have to? And it sounds like it's kind of a two-way street. Is the person who is offering the goods, so to say, offering the services, is he making you feel, or he or she making you feel like you have to do this, or it isn't black and white. It's very circumstantial, and there's a lot to it. So because I was listening to like I said, I was listening to your interview with AD, and initially I thought, maybe this was black and white, but not so much. This is very circumstantial, and really to get to the heart of it, so to say. I mean, what is going on? What is going on with the heart of both persons, both people involved, right? And so, I think I'm understanding. I think I'm following what you're saying. Josh, David, you got anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I was going to ask actually how can you give an example of let's say on because like I said, just for the sake of clarity, let's use my own personal side ministry, because I do work as a maintenance director for a rehab center and homeless shelter in Richmond, California. But outside of that, I also do my own personal homeless outreach on the weekends, like I said, and there are times when, like, let's say I want to address the church body where I'm going to, where my family at the church, and ask them if they want to be more involved in the ministry, either by volunteering to help with me or by giving. Is there something that I should be? Are you saying I should make a disclosure and be more forthcoming with my words toward the people so that they can make sure their motives are right? Or is that burden on me specifically? Because I'm kind of wondering, is there an example you can give, maybe from your own ministry or something like that, where you can say, this is how you should be able to ask for money if you're going to ask for money for the ministry? Is it just a level of clarity that you need to bring to the listener so they understand where the money's going?
Yeah, well, certainly in some contexts, it is just a matter of words, right? Like a lot of times people will, you know, solicit for donations, and they'll say, like, if you've benefited from this ministry, consider giving back. Like that's reciprocity language, right? Or if you've seen but if you say something like, you've seen the impact of our ministry, consider partnering with us, right? That's language of co-labor. So there's just a distinction of words, right? Sometimes though the situation's so obvious you wouldn't have to communicate that. Like with yours, you're ministering to the homeless, right? And so if you're accepting money from people who are not the ones benefiting from the ministry, right, there's not a lot of clarification needed. If you're receiving from the homeless, then there might be a lot of clarification needed that they don't have to pay you back for what you're doing for them.
Right.
Now in other contexts where you have just helped someone in such a sense that to take money in that context, even if you did tag on the right words, would be inappropriate. Like, for example, I consider that to be the case with counseling or weddings or funerals. In that case, you have a particular person who's got this particular need. And if they say, oh, I just want to support your ministry, they should be doing that in a different context. In that context, it just doesn't seem like it really is co-labor. It feels like it's more reciprocity. And I could probably say more about that, but as I've been, I did a lot of history research as I was writing this book, and I've been doing more since then, coming back to it with just clearer thoughts on these things. I've been finding a lot of examples of this, that churches, especially as they became more developed in the Middle Ages, they would have laws written about, not taking money in the context, even if someone said it was for something else, never taking money in the context of a funeral or a wedding. Wow. because that would be an easy way of tricking someone to say, oh yeah, it would be good if you donated,
Right.
So yeah, I think there are other contexts where, it's just right to not try to use language to change what the giving is. And I also see that in Paul's ministry, right? He never even took food from the Thessalonians. He didn't say, well, if you get this food as co-labor and not as reciprocity, then he doesn't play that dance.
Right. Is there ever a context, I guess, I'm sure there is, but I don't know if you know one off the top of your head, but where co-laboring actually does involve finances, where it's not reciprocity?
Co-labor does involve finances?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that's primarily what I'm talking about, is that when you give to a ministry out of a desire to support that ministry, that is co-labor. So
gotcha.
And I can explain a little more about that, because Paul, you see his lists of persecutions and sufferings that he had to endure. He's got like 3 different of these lists, and every one of them he always mentions that he had to work with his hands, which is kind of mind-blowing when he says, oh, I was beaten, I was shipwrecked, and then he mentions having to work with his hands, like that's on the same level. But think about it, he is having to engage in manual labor, foregoing the fruit of his labor so that he can do this work. Like, there's something kind of shameful about lowering your status in society so that you can pursue this ministry. And now when we, or any of the Corinthians or Philippians or whoever, were to labor and then forego some of the fruit of their labor so that Paul could have it, what they are doing is suffering beside him, right? Bearing his burdens, engaging in that exact same list. They might not be, getting the beatings or the shipwrecks, but they're getting one of those things on the list so that Paul doesn't have to. And so we are truly co-laboring when we give. And you see that exact same language in 3rd John. It's interesting because in 2nd John, John says that if you were to even give a greeting to a false teacher, you're participating in his wicked work, right? So you're co-laboring evilly. And then in 3rd John, he says to the elder Gaius that he should support certain missionaries because he says, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, not accepting anything from the Gentiles, right? So they're doing a good job not taking reciprocity. Therefore, we ought to support people like these that we may be fellow workers for the truth. So by giving financially to these missionaries, you are a fellow worker, right? That's co-labor right there.
Gotcha.
So then, is there a firm
Yeah.
line that you can kind of maybe articulate a little bit about? Let's say I was a missionary, right? And I went to an area that was particularly wealthy, but I was in some sense successful with a particular neighborhood. They were like, "This is incredible! You've changed our outlook on things. The entire aesthetic of the neighborhood has changed, and we're able to now make an impact. Can we bless you? We'd like to give you a gift." It's like, am I under obligation to look at that as them attempting reciprocity? Is there a context in which that's appropriate, or is that always inappropriate?
Yeah, so we can look at Paul's ministry and see, how he treated it. So with the Philippians, he was readily receiving because they were co-laboring with him. And you even see with Lydia that he has Lydia's, basically like the first of the Philippians that he converts. He has some hesitation with receiving her hospitality, but she insists, saying, if you have judged me a worthy servant of the Lord, basically, saying, if I am a sufficient co-laborer, then go ahead and accept this. And he does end up accepting her hospitality. So there is some discernment used. Are you just paying me back for this thing, or do you understand yourself as a co-laborer? And she seemed to. So then he accepts it. So that's me reading into that situation a little. But honestly, I think that what I'm describing is far clearer than what most people take about that passage. Because usually, what a lot of people say about Paul's financial policy is that, well, he only takes money when he's away from a church. Or after he's planted the church, he never takes money in the context of planning, or even hospitality in the context of planning, except for with Lydia. Like, she's this weird exception for some reason. But you see her put herself forward. No, I am a co-laborer, and then Paul accepts it. And so he accepts the Philippians' money in other situations, saying that they're the only ones who have partnered with him. And with the Corinthians, he tells them in both 1st and 2nd Corinthians that he plans on coming to them, or that he'd like to come to them, so that they can support him in his missionary journeys, using a Greek word that implies financial support. It's the word propimpo. It just means to send forward, but it implies financially, sending forward. So yeah, there's different contexts where
Yeah,
where it's
that's
right
what I was
wrong.
going to ask you. It seems like you're saying, okay, know who to take from when it comes to that time. When you see that they're at that level to be able to give to you, or where they're actually working with you. It's not cut and dry, right? Because in all honesty, I mean, we're all part of an economic system, whether we like it or not. And even there is reciprocity there, whether we like it or not. But it's all in how we're able to know what to do, and that comes down to being led by God to know who should be giving to us. I mean, it's not like God designated us, like you said, the Levites. God designated the Levites to perform a certain function and to reap the benefits after those functions were consecrated to God. But there is still an economic system there, and we have to be aware that that's going to be a part of whatever ministry we are playing into. However, like the widow, when you see the widow and Christ, he's like, she's given all she can. We see that and we're like, hey, when we see somebody that's struggling and hurting, they can't pay their mortgage, and we're the church, we should be able to pay their mortgage for them, right? And we should be able to say, hey, look, this guy's a millionaire that goes to our church, and he's co-laboring and helping us pay that mortgage. So you know what? We're going to take what he gives us, without having to use language saying, you're a sinner if you don't give. or and I know that's an extreme, right? But at some point, ministries have to ask for help, because
absolutely. And
there
Paul
is
asks for
cost
help all the
involved.
time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see where you're coming from. So I think I'm tracking.
Yeah, and I would just that was a lot of good stuff. I would just one little tweak on that. You were talking about who you receive from. It's not so much who, but the context, even more specific than the who, because Paul rejects the Corinthian money in both First and Second Corinthians, yet also says that he's hoping to come to them so that they can, send him.
They weren't there yet.
Yeah, well, so it's not just the maturity level; it's the context, right? Because it appears, from all appearances, it seems to be that they're trying to pay him back for conversion. He won't have that. He will come to them so they can support him on his next missionary journey. These are
absolutely
so that's two different kinds of earmarkings on the same people.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're really laying out like, hey, there's a careful line, and we need to be more conscious of it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Got you.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of areas where there's a lot of hard questions. There's a lot of gray areas, but I think there's some areas where this is very clear, and it's very clear that the church is not walking on that line well. And so the big ones that I go through in the book are essentially most of Christian publishing, most Christian seminaries, and most Christian conferences are all engaged in reciprocity, where they're exchanging money for ministry. So that's it's kind of like a controversial thing to say, but if you come to the Bible and you see that it really is setting up this distinction between reciprocity and co-labor, what are these things but reciprocity, the way that they're typically done?
No, I hear you. And there's a fine line, and that's even good for because I would love to do apologetics conferences here in the area because we have a need for them, and there's just not any. So how do I invest in that and be able to draw that line? And I think with your principle and what you're saying here is really going to help me think through that. So I mean, even with this conversation here, I think that's going to be a great help.
And let me ask
you think about that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Conley.
I was just going to say, for a conference, ideally you'd be partnering with individuals and churches that wanted to make that conference happen rather than charging the ones who are benefiting from the conference by coming.
Yeah, like and you can use surcharge, right?
Or $50.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
And there's a lot of great modern tools for this stuff too. There's Kickstarter and Patreon and GoFundMe and all these kind of crowdfunding tools that are perfect ways of not perfect in every sense, but they're perfectly okay ways of raising funds in a co-labor fashion.
Sure. I love it. I can't wait to actually dive into this book. I'm actually studying Greek, and so that's what's taken up the majority of my time. And the reason I'm studying Greek on my own is because I can't afford to go to seminary, right? And so I hear what you're saying. I would love nothing more than to, be in online class because I work full time, but the main thing that's holding me back from that is finances. And if somebody would offer those classes for free, right, I would be in a lot better shape. But I'm thinking about myself being selfish, right? But here's my question. So,
hey, I went to a free seminary, so.
Did you? Well, shoot me the link to that seminary.
Yeah, I would. The Law College and Seminary.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that later because I really would love to further my education. I have never been to Bible college, never been to seminary, obviously. And I would love to do that. And so if there's free resources out there, let me know. But let me ask you this, Conley. So you have, and I don't want to throw out Trinity because I love Trinity, right? But just using Trinity as an example, they charge for their students to, come there and participate and stuff. And so if I were to ask the president, well, why do you do this? And he tells me, well, it costs money to have.
You're going on my college now.
I am.
You're going to get some backlash here, right?
Look, man, that's
the ground floor.
That's why I'm trying to be as.
I love Braxton and John.
Well, we've had Braxton on before, so I love him too. But it costs money to run these types of. Seminary. It does cost money, and so what is your what would your response to someone who said that? Be is that a legit answer or not so much?
Yeah, so it absolutely costs money to run these things, and a lot of people seem to think that I just don't know how basic economics work, or that or that I don't realize it takes a lot of time and effort to write a book or things when I'm saying these things should be offered freely. No, I totally understand. I think the worker's worthy of his wages, and he should be paid. The question is just by who, right? Is it by co-laborers? In that context, Matthew 10 and even Luke 10, where Jesus says freely give in Matthew 10, who is the employer of the laborer in that? God is the Lord of the harvest. So it needs to be coming from him, not coming from customers, co-laborers rather than customers. So yeah, for a seminary, I think the first thing, if I'm trying to speak persuasively, the first thing I'd point out is most seminaries are funded pretty heavily by donors, and there's a lot of scholarships, and there's a lot of things going on that are very co-labor oriented. And so what you're seeing there is not just a reciprocity model that I'm saying burn to the ground, but you're seeing a mix of co-labor and reciprocity. And I'm saying, as you grow and you correct this situation, which I do believe needs reformation, needs to be corrected, what that looks like is expanding the co-labor till you don't have to engage in reciprocity anymore.
Right. Then you can offer those resources for free at that point. It might take time to get there, but once you build your community of co-laborers, for example, you will get there. God provides these things, right?
Right. Yeah. And and for a seminary starting from the ground up, maybe they would, hopefully they would never have to start that in that direction where they're engaging in reciprocity before co-labor. It doesn't have to be that way. But yeah, so oh goodness, I had something else to say about seminaries, but anyway, go on with whatever you're going to say next. Yeah.
No. I mean, like I said, the more I can say this up front, I did misunderstand you in the beginning, but now actually talking to you, you've really clarified a lot of things for me, and I really, really appreciate that, Conley. Because I was talking to David, I'm gonna throw him in the bus a little bit.
Yeah, you know what? He was telling me that you didn't understand basic economics.
Oh,
when you said that, I was like, you know what? I was thinking the same thing when Tyler was describing this to me. But no, man, the way you explained it, yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. So yeah, it's good stuff.
David Lyon is just as sinful as reciprocity.
Well, you're a heretic, so it doesn't matter.
So what I was gonna point out is that a lot of the way that reciprocity happens, though, is not necessarily the student paying, but their church paying, right? And so you've got a church that's funding the seminary. Now, there's a lot more stability with the church, and a lot of them want that ministry of that seminary to work well. And so if they were just giving on a regular basis as a way of supporting this other ministry, that would be co-labor oriented, as opposed to only doing it when they've got a student going through. And so there's a lot of small tweaks we could make to make this in line with what Scripture says. I don't think I'm asking for. I think the effects would be fairly radical. I don't think the kind of changes that people need to make would be so difficult or radical as people may think, though.
Right.
Yeah, there's a better way, is what you're saying. There's a better way to do what we're doing. And I think you're correct. I think that there's always a better way. And it takes somebody like a Conley Owens to put that principle out, and for somebody to adopt that principle and to start applying it. It doesn't happen overnight, you see the different economic models that have come and gone in our world, and you have free market economics and this and that, and you have all these different economics that come around, but there is always a better way, and there I think that you're right. I think you found it in the pages of Scripture, which I think is the best way we can live our lives.
Yeah. And the only hesitation I have about the phrase "a better way" is a lot of times people use that when they're trying to avoid calling something sinful. Like I am saying, that that Jesus is saying that this is wrong to, exchange ministry for money. But I'm also saying, I understand a lot of ministries have gotten themselves in this situation. I'm not saying burn it all to the ground. I'm saying, let's start taking steps to.
I'm being more careful than you.
Yeah.
I'm teasing.
Josh, you're awful quiet, brother. What you got, man?
I'm just enjoying the third voice, David. Thank you for joining us, bro. This is great. In my mind, I'm very visual, and so I think about things kind of like pictorially, usually. But this is a little more abstract.
Yeah, you'll love the book then. There's lots of diagrams.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's this is more abstract than it is visual for me, and so I have to map it directly onto an example for myself. And to give a little bit more love to the organization I work for, the Rescue Mission, we house people for a year-long Christian-based program for rehabilitation, as well as extended stays in the overnight homeless shelter dormitories, and I can see that this is almost the right running machine for what it is that you're describing.
Yeah.
Though we just call it ministry modeling, you're calling it a Dorean principle, where we don't charge for anything the entire time. They don't give us any money. They don't do any. They don't owe us any kind of monetary compensation whatsoever for any of the clothes, the food, the rooming, the cleaning supplies, the sanitation stuff, all of the things that they need in order to take care of themselves, get themselves saved and sober over the course of the year in the rehab program. We're not requiring anything of them. They don't have to give us. They don't. It's like we're not charging for what we're doing. And yet the entire foundation, because it's a nonprofit, is funded by giving and donations. Right. And most of those are either private givers or local church bodies that provide virtually everything that we're able to do for these people. And I can see the outworking of that principle very clearly in the job that I do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm the maintenance person, and so I'm the one that's going to, if somebody breaks something, I'm going to fix it. And when I fix it, the thing that I get in order to fix it is going to either be provided by buying it from Home Depot with the money that was given from some church, or else product that was directly given from a church that was a donation that goes into my ability to use those things. And so I feel like I live in a world that's very practically oriented around what it is that you're describing in that way.
Yeah, and honestly, most ministries are, right. Like, I'm not saying like every institution is corrupt. Absolutely. Right. It's just there's a lot of standard practices in our generation that are going counter to this. And your ministry sounds really awesome. I'd love to hear more about it sometime, because we'd like to do more homeless outreach. We do a little, but we're a small church, so we haven't done too much. And I actually built a additional unit behind my house that I call a dorm, and we've used it to house people, not necessarily the homeless, although that happened once, but so this is something I definitely got a heart for. Would love to pick your brain more on it.
Absolutely. Hey, y'all are close by too, man. Hey.
Yeah.
But one thing though that I was saying, and I think we've already cut on this or talked about it a little bit, but Josh, and this is for you too. There is a co-labor aspect to this, and there, unfortunately, it falls in the category of quid pro quo, honestly, because you are asking them to get sober. You're saying you can stay here if you remain sober. Right? You're not going to let these people come in and continue what they're doing, right?
Well,
so
there are rules.
There is rules. There is an economic to it on another level that's not necessarily financial. And and for me, understanding that everything that we do in this world is not necessarily financial, right? I could barter for room and board, right? Barter my lack of wanting to do drugs, right? So but and that's what I'm saying. So like, I guess where I'm coming at is like that carefulness, right? We have to be careful, because in any aspect of ministry, whether it involves finances or not, there is this element there, right?
That's an interesting observation that you've made, and certainly in the book I do say that this has to do with far more than just paper money. This has to do with food and hospitality, etc. But requiring to continue to minister someone, requiring their compliance with the ministry is not really something I considered, and I'm sure there's a way to phrase that so that it fits in neatly, but I can't think of one at the moment.
Yeah, but wouldn't that resonate though? I mean, back in the day, I mean, room and board was a way to live yeah. So I mean, and
Room
that's
and
why
board, yes, but
I forgot to
but
ask this
complying with the
earlier
rules,
on.
that's a
Right.
different question. Yeah.
But I forgot to ask this earlier on,
Sure.
and I was wanting to hear more about the history, of things that you studied, because this does flow into that, and yeah, compliance to rules is one thing, but like, I mean, the ancient Israelites had foreigners that they could keep for a long period of time if they required a service from them. They could actually keep them as they call servants or slaves, and they could actually keep them for a lifetime almost, and they would be providing them a service. It was an economic exchange that did require reciprocity. So where do you draw the line here from the New Testament and the Old Testament? Is the New Testament just the better way? And I know you hate the better way, but but in essence, is it the better way versus what we see God instituting in the Old Testament?
No, I think you just like I described with the Israelites and the Levites, right? You see ministry regulated in the same way, where it's not with reciprocity but with co-labor, and you even see this if you're willing to look more typologically at the kinds of things Israel does. You look at Abraham refusing funds from the king of Sodom, and you see the people. As they build the temple on multiple occasions, they do it in a co-labor fashion, and occasionally they'll take funds from other nations. But if you look at what's going on, usually it's in the context of where they had been wronged, and they're getting their tax money back rather than actually charging others. So there's a lot of these co-labor themes in the Old Testament too. In fact, one of the most significant ones, which throughout history has been considered the complementary parallel to Simon Magus, of whom Simon is named, is that of Gehazi, right? Gehazi got, Naaman got his leprosy removed through Elisha's ministry, and then wanted to pay him back. And Elisha wouldn't have it. He said no, and he goes on. But Gehazi, his servant, goes back to Naaman, tries to get the stuff, gets the stuff, and then comes back to Elisha. And Elisha says, "This was not a time for receiving various things." And so he has Naaman's leprosy transferred to Gehazi. So you see this multiple times in the Old Testament where charging for ministry was forbidden. There are a couple times where it looks like ministry may have been purchased. So Samuel brings to Saul money to find his donkeys. It never says he takes it. The same thing with I'm blanking on the king's name, but his wife takes money to a prophet. But it's most people have interpreted both of those circumstances to show the wickedness of the person Saul and this king who's more obviously wicked. Throughout the Old Testament, there seems to be a very clear pattern that charging for ministry was forbidden.
It seems like with the Old Testament, really with anything in the Old Testament, and looking at it in light of the New, there seems to be a telos, right, in the New Testament. So with everything like what you were talking about with typology, right? And so we see in the New Testament these communities of believers getting together, selling everything, and then funding, co-laboring on a huge scale together, right? And they're supporting each other, and this is what pleases God. He says to Jesus says to the rich young ruler, "Sell all your possessions, give it to the poor, and then come follow me," right? And so there's this, give and take there, and with the typology, man, you're a Reformed guy. I would love to talk to you typology one of these days, man. Have you back on CSG to talk that?
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, if you want to, if we want to push the typology even further, and I wouldn't build an ethic out of this, but if you accept the ethic that I'm saying, and then you're willing to look back at the Old Testament and see other things. If you consider, a lot of people consider Adam to be a priest of a priestly nature, in the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
expanding this kingdom. What did God say? It's not good for man to be alone, and He created a woman to be with him, and and so they're co-laboring in the garden. Like the whole set of humanity was about co-labor. And so not that buying and selling things is wrong, but in the context of ministry, if you, as many people have in history, seen the garden as a type of ministry, co-labor is what is encouraged.
Sure.
So oh yeah, and there was one other Old Testament passage that I think is really potent, and I quote this at the very end of the book. I don't really explain it because I think it stands on its own pretty well. But Micah 3:11 says, "Its priests teach for a price; its prophets practice divinations for money; its heads take judgment, or its heads give judgment for a bribe. Yet they lean on the Lord and say, is not the Lord in the midst of us? No disaster shall come upon us." So you have this very clear statement in Micah 3:11 that you've got all these different offices in Israel taking money to do the office that they're supposed to do, like exchanging the work of their office for money, and thinking that they're okay in the Lord's eyes when they're not. So what were those offices? Head, right? That's like a prince, or the key prince is the king. So you have king, you have it's mentioned the priest, and I mentioned the prophets. Prophet, priest, and kings. These are the three offices of Christ. And as we represent Him, if we're charging money for ministry and then leaning on the Lord and thinking that we're good in His eyes, even though we're charging people for the thing that He has called us to do for free, to freely give, we're not in as good a position as we think we are.
I kind of chuckled a while ago. Check out this ticker down there at the bottom of the screen. I got thumbs up, share, subscribe, and bell for more CSG. Is that reciprocity, Conley?
Well, I think people know what for more CSG is. I think they would know that you wouldn't be actually giving them more. They would just get notified of it more.
Right.
Now
And
I do
it's
think
free
there's
anyway. So
Yeah, I mean,
Sure. Well, there is I don't know if you monetize your channel, but that's one thing that I've come to the conviction since publishing the book, that I don't think that I think at that point you're exchanging, you're exchanging ministry for views, right? Like as long as they view and they watch it. So I think there's, these are fuzzier things that I'm talking about, but there are actually implications for even free YouTube channels.
Right.
that's
right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Because I see also the freedom aspect too. So there's like, if somebody can give and co-labor with you, that's fine, but they still get it for free if they can't. And then there's also that aspect I see as well where, like, if you have the money, then obviously work and co-labor. But if you don't, then don't buy that book right now. Maybe that's God's plan. Maybe He doesn't want you to buy that book right now.
Right.
I mean, there's so many different. I see, but I think I understand the essence of what you're saying is that the church has been careless, and we need to be more careful.
Yeah, and this is
because nothing is set in stone, and when it comes to this, I think. But I do agree that there are a lot that we have crossed the line.
right.
Yeah.
And this is something every generation has to face. Our particular generation has a particular shape to it, but in the beginning, and I have a chapter 10 is on basically the sub-apostolic church, the church immediately after the apostles. They were people trying to sell their teaching for money, and so they dealt with that. And then later on, people are trying to sell ordinations for money, which is commonly called simony.
Absolutely. Where did you gain that from? If you could just give me a resource that I can, dude, I'm a church history nerd, right?
Okay.
So, like I said, I'm on my 5th church history class. Every time that you sit and you listen to a professor, they have different things and they don't cover certain things. And
Sure.
there's books you read that they don't really highlight certain things, but where did you get these at?
Are you thinking of simony in particular, or
whatever
any
you
of this?
can offer,
So
man.
lately, what I've been doing is taking important phrases from my book, like that come from verses, right, and searching meticulously every year in Google Books to get everything I can. I'm hoping to eventually make a documentary on like the history of the commercialization of Christianity. But yeah, lately I've been reading this is Wycliffe's book on simony, and then this one inside this book is Jan Hus's on simony. He came after Wycliffe. So and then Gregory the Great also wrote a lot on simony. But But then you also had people selling relics in the Middle Ages. Later, you have people selling indulgences during the Reformation. Later, you have forced tithing, which still exists today. You know, some jurisdictions, they will tax you and then give your money to whatever church you signed up as, you know, being part of that denomination. You know, and people argued against that, including John Milton. I recently discovered John Milton argued against that practice. Then there were pew rents. That was very popular during the 1800s for you to have to rent the pew that you sat in.
Really?
Yeah, and this was
Absolutely, dude. You could see
I did
it
not know
when you
that.
go. If you live in Virginia, you would see certain pews that were actually designated and paid for by people like George Washington and
Wow.
other people.
Okay.
Absolutely, man. We
Huh.
see it. We see it here. You just take a trip to historic Williamsburg, and you'll see it.
All right.
Yeah, and this was often considered more tasteful than, you know, passing around an offering plate. But I don't see how it's more tasteful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one's obviously reciprocity, and the other's obviously co-labor. So you know where I would stand on that. And then and then what we're dealing with now primarily. I mean, you still have there are small things like you know, in the early days of the internet, it was pretty common to charge for sermons online. And as people realized, oh no, you can get these things out a lot better if you don't charge for them, that kind of faded away. But right now, I think the main thing that we're dealing with is copyright. Copyright has only existed in its modern form for 300 years. The Statute of Anne was the first copyright law that came about in 1710. And prior to that, it was not common. It was not a thing really for authors to get royalties for their books. They would want their book to get out, and so they would give the manuscript to a publisher that thought it would be profitable enough to print it. And it was the secular publisher that's making money, not the author that's making royalties. So it's only since the mid 18th century that you've had this kind of model we have with the Christian publishing industry. And that issue of copyright, you know, that's really what is affecting a lot of things right now. So I really consider that the modern battle for the church to consider and fight.
Now, you were talking about that with AD, I believe, and you said something about the way that the United States has their laws set up. It makes for people to have to copyright. Is that, or did I misunderstand?
No, that's right. Yeah, as soon as you have recorded your, work in a fixed medium, it's copyrighted by U.S. law. And yeah, necessary disclaimer: I'm not a lawyer, so don't take any of this as legal advice.
Right.
But yeah, it's yeah, a lot of people think that you have to register to get something copyrighted. They say, "Oh yeah, I got something copyrighted." It's like everybody does. Every time you write something on a napkin, it's copyrighted. Like that's how copyright works in the U.S.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Conley. What would your recommendation be, like, as a beginning steps for the church to take on copyright?
Yeah, well, it depends on the field, right? It depends on if we're talking about Bible manuscripts, Bible critical editions, Bible translations, books, software. Like each one of these fields, I'd probably have like a little different strategy for. But in general, what I'd like to see is more people using public domain dedications, where they're basically saying that I'm dedicating this to the public domain and not requiring anything in return or restricting the use of this in any way. And this is something that the Bible translation community has been adopting more and more, not necessarily public domain disclosures, but special licensing, recognizing that, you know, if people just use copyright, even if they're really kind about it and would let us translate, you know, a lot of times they're not contactable, you know, they die and then who knows who's inherited the rights to this book. And now we can't translate it. And like, there's a lot of, there's a lot that's lost that people don't realize is when you assert full copyright.
Right, because there's other types of licenses people can get, right? Like Creative Commons license.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Exactly. And I make an argument in the book that I don't think any of the Creative Commons licenses are really sufficient. I think you need to go all the way to a public domain disclosure. And so there's something called or dedication. There's something called Creative Commons Zero, which is essentially that, which I would recommend.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to look into that. David, Josh, you guys got anything else you want to add before we start?
I'm good, man. You know, I'm good. I think I've heard the essence of this, and you know, it gives you a lot to think about and how to be careful. I mean, of course, I would love to write a book and get the revenue from it, but it's not for the fact that I'm trying to get revenue more or less than trying to pay off the fees it took for the paper and the stuff, whatever.
Sure.
And then be able to support my family if I was doing it full time. Because if I'm working something full time, I'm giving my entire talent to it. You want to be able to support your family and do stuff, and
Right.
that's not what I heard. Which I thought, honestly, I was going to hear some of that today. I thought I was going to hear the other side of the forced giving. Like the guy asking me that I have to pay my 10% or I'm going to hell.
Right.
Yeah.
And now if I don't take anything, then I'm going to hell. But no, it was actually quite the opposite. You've surprised me, Connolly, and
Right.
I really love that you have cautioned, and I think we need to be cautionate about what we take, how we take it. And if that's what your book accomplishes, praise God, because the church needs it. And just like the church needs biblical literacy, and just as the church needs church history, just as the church needs apologetics, the church needs to understand finances. They need to understand what is required and what is not, and what should be, just done out of the kindness of our hearts. I mean, we don't think about these things. We don't. We get lost in whatever economic scheme or whatever country or whatever system we're in. Sometimes we just get swept away, and it takes people that are brave, that ask you these questions of clarification, to say, hey, what do you mean by that? And it takes the courage that you have to be able to say, I'm putting this on paper, and it needs to be said to the church regardless. You're like a modern Paul writing to the church, and that's awesome, bud.
Yeah, I've got nothing to lose.
Josh, any final things before we wind down?
First of all, thank you for even taking up the gauntlet to talk about something as complicated and frustrating as finance, and trying to look the corruption that's in the modern church directly in the face and be like, hey, that's not acceptable. There's something here that's gone wrong. And then really try to put your finger on what it was. And be careful enough, like David said, be careful about the nuance and about making sure that people understand that it's not like, here's these 2 rules, and if you follow them, then everything you do is hunky-dory. It's like, no, you need to be thinking, you need to be realizing, you need to be discerning in your ministries. And I think there's kind of another side to the coin where people that get involved in ministries should first, I think, and this is something that I can say in the course of this conversation, I've been personally convicted a little bit on some of the time that I've been frustrated with how much time I have to spend on certain things like the homeless ministry and making the care package bags, and then going and finding homeless camps and spending money out of my own pocket to get pizza and stuff and make chili and cornbread to go feed 50 to 100 people, and then often not even getting so much as a thank you. And that can be rather frustrating. But then I think this conversation reminded me that
your reward's in heaven.
Right. I'm worshiping.
Right.
Is what I'm doing. I'm participating in Christ, and I'm worshiping by doing those things. And my expectations have gone awry sometimes. I think that's what it is. And I really appreciate the way that this has brought clarity to my own personal walk in being somebody who ministers to other people. I'm not leading a church. I'm not a pastor. But I definitely have plenty of people that I've been discipling over the years, and been involved in giving, and been involved in ministering to people and being evangelistic and things like that. And it kind of this kind of reminds me of when David was going to receive a threshing floor as a gift, and he said, no, I'm going to pay you. I'll not give to God that which costs me nothing. And so noticing that the obligation is to God, like you said, the obligation is to God. It's not necessarily to one another. It's to God. And that's what brings us closer together and gives us the ability, I think, to bless one another in a bigger and more genuine way than we could have if we just tried to make ministry into business. And I really appreciate just your willingness to come on and talk to people and, clarify and take the licks of somebody who's like, I don't really understand what you're talking about. You mean this? Like, nope, I don't mean that. And you've been very gracious and well-mannered, and I just appreciate you right now. And
Yeah. Hey,
I
so
really
Conley,
would.
can I run one more thing past you?
Yeah, sure.
I
Go
mean,
for
Josh,
it.
do you mind? Are you done
No,
yet,
go ahead.
Josh? I don't want to jump on you. So, like, here's one of the things that I was thinking because people like me want to end up doing an apologetics ministry that involves the digital community, right? So, even with a Patreon, right? I was thinking about this, and I said, you know what? Me and another friend, he's from Canada, really close ministry friend of mine that has put out a lot of content over the years. And we want ultimately everything to be available and free for listeners, right? But in a Patreon, you have to have tiers, right?
You don't
You
have
have to
to.
have it. Well, yeah. I get you. But obviously, there's that cost if I'm like selling shirts or something for another reason. But like, uh, um, as far as my content goes, as far as my ministry goes, like if I were to make available a certain podcast or a certain feature of the podcast to those that were able to give and to co-labor, and then it would go free within, let's say, 3 months. I mean, that would still be acceptable on that model, I think. Right?
So, so it would certainly be worse than keeping it.
Well, of
Or
course,
sorry,
yeah,
sorry, it would certainly be
absolutely.
better than keeping it secret forever. But I don't think it's sufficient. If really, there
No,
shouldn't be any perks, right? It shouldn't be. There should be no
there should be
ministry
no
exchange
perks at
for
all. Okay.
money. Yeah. Now, if you're going to sell a T-shirt that has a Bible verse on it or
Yeah,
something, sure, but
totally different.
that's that's a kind of a different situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, and one thing I think too that's not directly related, but Jesus pointed out that he never taught in secret, and I think that's what often happens with some of these fundraising models. Is people end up teaching in secret. They teach the extra stuff in secret, and usually it's not because they're really trying to hide something, but that is one extra flavor to this that I think.
So inspiring philosophy is going to hell then. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
No middle ground.
Mike's gonna kill me. No, I'm just joking.
Well, I guess in
No,
that scenario, would it be the
I
fact
did
that
it on Tyler's show. So
I'll
in
send
that
it to
in
him.
that
Don't
scenario
worry.
specifically, would it be something like making an incentive that makes it not acceptable? Is that your like the perk or the incentive?
Yeah, it's the reciprocity, right? There's an exchange of money for ministry. I'm going to give you this ministry because you've given me this money. That's right. It's kind of definitional reciprocity. Now you could say, well, it's the speediness with which I did it, but I mean,
hey,
in the end,
but
it's
wouldn't it be like
ministry.
co-laborers too? Like these guys are the co-laborers, so they get the product first before it goes to national or to the masses, right? Like, hey, this is your
Yeah,
sneak peek. I mean, I guess it's kind of a way you have to look at it, and I think there is a
sure.
heart motive behind it,
So
right?
yeah, I suppose if you came up with something like, hey, as my partners, I want you to have a chance to give feedback on this before I do the final edit and send it out, or I suppose there could be things like that, but usually that's not what's going on in these things.
Right.
It's like I'm trying to give you something so that you will sign up for these higher tiers, and as you pay more, you get more, and it's and so it is a reciprocity. So yeah, I'm not saying like no one could ever use tiers with Patreon and be in the right. I'm just saying that typically what's going on there is reciprocity.
Right. Use the tiers without putting the ministry, so to say, or the teachings of the gospel into it.
Right.
If you're going to have tiers, like make it an entertainment thing, Christian based, yes, family friendly, but make it entertainment, so to say. I mean, that's just one idea, right? Not teaching, right? That's the thing that we're trying to make clear, is that the gospel, the teachings of Jesus Christ, are to go to the world, to the nations, free of charge, right?
Right. Yeah. And I do address a lot of these questions, like the one about Patreon. I do address that in the book too. And one of the nice things is that since it's on a website, the DoreanPrinciple.org,
Okay.
Dorean spelled Dorean, you can just control F through the whole thing. It's all on one page. It's not like split different chapters, different pages, which
Okay.
I hate it how many books are like that. Like old books that they put online, they put like every chapter on a different page. Like put it all there so I could just control F.
And for anyone wondering, Conley actually does offer his book for free, ladies
It's
and gentlemen.
true.
You do not have to buy it.
That's right. And yeah, the physical paperback. My church funded the printing of it. The publisher is covering the shipping, so it is even the shipping is free. If you go to the DoreanPrinciple.org/order and you fill out that form, you don't have to sign up for an account or anything. It will come to your door, and you won't have to give any credit card information or anything.
Praise God, man. Praise God for that. I do have one more question for you, Conley, if you got a few more moments.
Sure.
And then we'll actually wind down. You said that you had received some fee or some kind of pushback on this. And to me, anyway, I don't see anything I can really push back on. But is there any pushback that you've received that has actually made you think and maybe do a double take about this whole concept of the Dorean Principle?
So there's certainly questions I've gotten about particular, these thought experiments. Well, what about this particular situation? I've certainly refined my thinking through a lot of those questions. Sure. There's at least one question where I wish I had written a lot more about this in the book, but it didn't really change my opinion, which is the question of, well, what about something that's like, let's say I sell candles and I put a Bible verse on a candle. Now, is it wrong for me to charge for that? And I think the answer is no, because the essence of what you're selling is not the gospel, even if you've slapped, Bible verse on it.
Right. It's a candle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And In-N-Out, that has a Bible verse on the bottom of their cup, like they don't have to give In-N-Out for free.
Right.
Yeah, that's the essence of what is being sold, as long as that's not the gospel. I think everything that we do should, have biblical framing. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if you're teaching math to kids, you're telling them God created the world and he's the one in charge of logic. It doesn't matter if it's a candle or t-shirt with a Bible verse on it. Ideally, everything has some kind of biblical framing to it. And I don't think we have to pretend that everything is ministry. And that's one of the problems with a lot of.
So you're telling us as content creators, we've got to be more creative in the artistic side so we can give the ministry for free.
Yeah, well, that's what one person observed. Well, doesn't this push us towards secularizing everything so that we don't have to, so that we can charge for it? No, like I said, if the essence is what being sold is something other than ministry, then sure. But if you're going to call it ministry, you shouldn't be charging for it. And that's something, is because a lot of people have jumped on this train of calling everything they do ministry, which is just nonsense. There are right ways and wrong ways of worshiping God. For example, images, right? We shouldn't be worshiping God through images, but that doesn't make all images wrong. And so if everything is worship, if everything is ministry, then that would make like all images wrong, right? And it's
right. So if I'm praying and then Jonathan Rumi pops in my head from The Chosen, and it's like Jesus, No, I'm just joking.
So yeah, but it's this really common theology of work where people observe the verse. It says, that we're a living sacrifice. Oh, well, everything I do is worship. Everything is ministry. Even my work is ministry. Well, if that were true, then I would say you shouldn't be charging for the work that you do. But it's not true, thankfully. And it's perfectly okay for you to charge to be, a janitor, a software engineer, or whatever you are.
Sure. So get the book, theDoreanPrinciple.org. Where else can people find you at, Conley? Do you have another, do you have a YouTube channel or?
Sure. A couple of things about the book. There's also, it's also on Kindle, and it's also there's also an audiobook. So you can just search for it on any podcatcher if you're used to listening to podcasts. And then as for me, I'm on Facebook. There is a group for this book called Money and Ministry. So if you look for the group called Money and Ministry, that's where I'm hoping to organize most of the community that's trying to sort these things out. Okay. And those are the primary places. And then, of course, my church website. If you just Google Silicon Valley Reformed Baptist Church, you'll find it.
Right on, bro.
And then you guys are still wrong because you're Calvinists, but that's okay.
Well, we can certainly have a follow-up discussion about that. I'd be very happy to.
Next time, let's do it. Man. Yeah,
all you had to do was say April Fool's to me, and then you'd been able to drop me, but you failed. So no, I'm just joking. Guys, I love you, man. Thanks, Conley, for coming on, man. Yeah. And thanks for allowing me, Tyler, to come here and just be able to air out some of those thoughts that we were talking about. And Josh, even you made some great points that blew my mind. It's just knowing what you're doing out there to all those liberals, and helping them reinforce their political biases. No, I'm just joking. I'm just teasing. No, it's amazing, and to hear, and to even make me more cautious on what I'm doing. I mean, it's always a step towards the right direction of glorifying God and worshiping Him in spirit and truth. And that's my desire, man. And truth.
That's absolutely right. So I want to leave everybody with a Bible verse, and it's going to be Hebrews 13:5, and then we will sign off. And Conley, I really appreciate you coming on, brother. We are going to have you back on to squash David with his
Sounds good.
garbage heretic stuff.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love
Josh
to.
on my side, so at least we're in
Well,
the
at
right
least it's
direction.
2-on-2, so we're not totally going to demolish you. But anyway, Hebrews 13:5, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Conley
So
Owens.
that we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me?
Amen.
Yeah,
Amen.
exactly. And even if I'm charging for my ministry, He's still going to be there with me. No, I'm teasing. I had to add some.
You're
some
going to get
humor in here.
forsaken
I
tonight.
love you guys.
Son.
I love you guys. I'm just playing.
All right, guys. Conley Owens, thank you so much for joining us, brother. We'll have to have you back. Josh, David, thank you guys again. As always, I love you guys, and I'm glad to have your input on this topic. So we will see you next time. CompleteSinners.com is the website. You can get all of our episodes for free. And we appreciate all of our listeners, and thank you all so much again. We will see you next time. Good night. God bless and stay
God
like
bless
Christ.
y'all.